When an ERP implementation is in trouble, it's easy to blame everyone on the project and have the temptation to want to fire everyone, but I want to talk about why that's a really bad idea here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And we're helping clients through their transformation process, helping advise them with the digital strategy, the planning of the implementation, as well as the actual execution of the implementation. One of the common things we hear when things get difficult is that there's a temptation to want to just fire people. There's a temptation to want to use people as scapegoats. You start pointing at the software vendor, maybe the system integrator. You might point to your internal program manager. You might point to the internal project team. Maybe the executive sponsor is to blame. There's a lot of blame to go around, but what I want to do is talk about some of the root causes of why these projects fail and some of the challenges that come up during these projects and why it's not necessarily a good idea to start firing or blaming other people before you get to those root causes. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. Internal alignment is one of those things that can be a root cause for success or failure. And in the case of troubled projects, oftentimes internal misalignment is one of the root causes. And it's easy to look to your team or look to your program manager, maybe even your software vendor or your technical implementer, and want to blame them, but it's important to also recognize that there might be other things at play, things below the surface, deeper root causes that might be creating difficulties for the project team and all the people that are involved in the project. And internal alignment is something that is sort of like either headwinds or tailwinds, depending on if you have it or you don't. If you don't have internal alignment and you're misaligned, people aren't on the same page with what the goals of the project are and how the project is supposed to support longer term goals and objectives, it creates a sort of headwind for the project. It creates tension and it creates difficulty. It slows things down. It leads to a lot of chaos. It leads to budget overruns, time overruns. And on the surface, you look at those symptoms and you say, well, that must be the project manager's fault or maybe the software vendor's fault. But the reality is oftentimes it's because you have this internal misalignment, which makes decision-making very difficult and it slows down the overall project. Now, on the other hand, if you do have internal alignment, everyone's on the same page, everyone's rowing in the same direction. Now suddenly you've converted these headwinds into tailwinds and it actually speeds things along. So one of the keys that we always recommend to our clients is before you start pointing too much blame to internal and external resources that are involved in your project, look at your level of internal alignment and assess that. Understand whether or not you really are on the same page. And if you're not, attack that problem first before you start assessing and pointing blame with some of the other people involved in the project. ERP implementations typically take a huge amount of resource commitment, both internally and externally. And oftentimes what happens is it's easier for your third-party software vendors and system integrators to provide the resources that are needed because they have fully dedicated resources available for your project. But when it comes to your internal resources, those people that are doing their day jobs and they're keeping the lights on in the organization at the same time they're expected to run this project, oftentimes they can't keep up. It's difficult for them to make decisions fast enough. It's difficult for them to keep up with the workload. And oftentimes that will be the cause of what slows things down. So one of the things you have to do is look at making sure that you have the right level of resource commitment on the project, ideally when you first start. A lot of times organizations that see this time and time again, they'll get started on the project and they prematurely jump into the project with the system integrator and the software vendor without having their internal team mobilized. They don't have the resources committed. They don't have the right people in place. They don't have the right skills. They haven't backfilled those resources to help them do their day jobs when they're off doing the project work. And when you don't have those things in place, it's easy to blame the internal resources because they're not doing their job. They're not doing a good enough job supporting the project. And the reason for that oftentimes is because they're busy doing their day jobs and they don't have time to do both. So one of the biggest things you can do to make sure that you're really looking at the root cause of why there might be challenges in your project is to make sure that you have the right level of resource commitment, both on the project itself, but also operationally making sure you backfill and provide support for the people that are being pulled away from their day jobs to support the project. Another thing to consider when a project is going off the rails is to really look at your project governance and make sure that you have the right governance and controls in place. And if you don't have project controls in place, what ends up happening oftentimes is it creates a bunch of problems and delays and budgetary overruns, missed milestones and things like that. And it's oftentimes easy to blame individuals or blame groups of people for that, when in reality, the root cause of the problem might be because you didn't have the project governance and controls in place to ensure that the project could stay on track. Now, in theory, this could be the project manager's fault. It could be your program manager's fault, your internal project manager, or your external project manager. But the reality is you as an organization, if you're implementing ERP software, it's really up to you to make sure that you have that project governance in place, the program governance. Your technical resources, your software vendor, the system integrator, the technical implementers, they're responsible for one individual work stream within a broader program, but they're not typically responsible for the entire program. They're responsible for one piece of it. You also have other work streams that involve your internal resources, your data migration, your architecture, your change management, the process improvements, user adoption and training, all that stuff that completes an overall ERP implementation. Those things complete the program, and you need someone sitting over the top of the overall program. And if you don't have that in place, you can't expect the people operating at the individual work stream level to necessarily be responsible for making sure the project finishes it on time and on budget and the way you expect it to. So program governance and program controls are something that are absolutely critical to have in place to make sure that you're setting up your resources to succeed. It always amazes me how many organizations just jump into an ERP implementation without doing the proper planning up front. And then they get further down the path of the implementation, they wonder why things aren't going the way they planned. Well, the reason things aren't going as planned is because you didn't have a plan to begin with. And that's often the case with these sorts of projects. Now, one thing that's really important to recognize is oftentimes when software vendors and the technical resources, the technical implementers, when they come to the table with a proposal to implement whatever software it is they're going to implement, oftentimes they'll have their proposed plan for their individual work stream, for their technical design, build, and rollout of the software. That's great. That's a good starting point. It's a good input into the overall project plan, but it's only one piece of the project plan. And if you rest your entire plan on that one piece of it, it's going to be incomplete and you're going to miss a lot of the other things that need to happen within the project. And inevitably what happens is the project goes over budget, you miss milestones, people get really stressed out, the timelines are too aggressive, all that stuff. So it's really important that you take the time to do phase zero planning up front. And if you haven't done phase zero planning up front, it's really not realistic to expect that your internal or external resources are going to be able to execute the way that you would expect. So one thing we always recommend to clients is to really slow things down when you're first getting ready to start an implementation and make sure you take plenty of time to do that phase zero phase of the project. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of what phase zero is and what some of the activities are that you need to focus on here, but I will point to a couple of resources that might help. One is this video right here that I posted on YouTube that points to some of the different work streams and components of phase zero. You can also go to this QR code right here and download our phase zero checklist off our website. That'll give you sort of a sense of some of the things that need to happen during your phase zero plan. And those two resources will hopefully give you a better picture, a better flavor of the things you need to do to make sure that you are setting up a strong foundation and a strong trajectory for the plan to ensure that you're making your people more likely to succeed in the overall project. ERP implementations are difficult, and ERP implementations require a number of different resources to make them successful. One of the missing links in ERP implementations commonly is a lack of that independent third-party objective advisor to help you really manage the overall program and all the different moving pieces and parts of the project. I mentioned earlier in this video that software vendors and the system integrators will oftentimes provide their technical resources and their technical proficiency to execute their piece of the overall project, but that's just one piece. You need someone that can sit over the top of it and help manage the entire thing, and that's something that independent tech-agnostic consulting firms like Third Stage can help with. And the reason that tech-agnostic independence is so important is because you want someone that's not affiliated with the software vendor, that's more of a representative of you, that helps you manage the project and helps really act as a extension of your project team to ensure that you're able to manage the project and be in control of the project. If you don't have that in place, what ends up happening is you not only have an incomplete team, because now you're focused too much on the technical aspects of the project and not enough on the business aspects, but also because the software vendors typically have perverse incentives. They have economic incentives that are not aligned with yours. Their job is to get you to buy and start using as much subscription-based software as possible, because that's when the meter starts running and that's how they make their money. Your job is to make sure your business is successful. So you need someone that's going to be making money only from you and not from the software vendors, so that you know that that person is aligned with your interest in making sure that the overall program is successful. And again, that's where companies like Third Stage Consulting can help. So I hope this has provided you some guidance on how to ensure that you don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, or you don't necessarily start firing people prematurely on the project or blaming people prematurely on the project. You want to make sure that you've got these foundational pieces in place so that your people are well set up for success. Now, if you've done all these things that I described here today and you still have performance issues, then you can start looking at individual issues or individual performance issues that might be contributing to the overall challenges you're experiencing. If you'd like to talk more about how to set up your project for success, I encourage you to reach out to me. I've included my email address below. You can reach out to me directly. My team and I would be happy to discuss with you how to make your project more successful and maybe just brainstorm ideas with you on how to ensure that you're set up for success. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to chat with you. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.